Welcome to the second lecture on signaling theory. We're going to expand our discussion of costly signaling and also talk a little bit about the idea of costless signaling. Just kind of round out the discussion and maybe talk a little bit more about how it applies to managerial accounting and why it would be useful to understand this in a variety of accounting fields. So I wanted to start in terms of covering costs, finishing up and putting tying a little bow on costly signaling with the film Moneyball. So there are a couple scenes in here at least one scene. Maybe there's another one I'll bring up as well. But there's one scene in here that I think is useful. So Moneyball is a film, and it takes some liberties with the history and the characters, of course, like Hollywood loves to do. But there is a true basis to the story from the Oakland days, where they're a relatively poor franchise in baseball, or were at this point anyway, and they were trying to compete against. I believe the figure from the beginning was they have something like between $30 and $40 million for payroll. The Oakland A's do, whereas the New York Yankees, who they played in the 2001 World Series, I believe, or the playoffs to the World Series, had something along the lines of 110 to 120 million, dollars for payroll. So we're talking about competing against a team that can pay 3 to 4 times as much per player than compared to you. So it's an underdog story, and from a financial perspective, it seems very difficult. It would seem very difficult for the Oakland A's to attract enough talent enough of the high name talent that costs a lot of money to compete, and the show begins with them losing in that playoff series to the New York Yankees specifically. And so then the idea is the Brad Pitt character and the Jonah Hill character, these two in the picture right here, eventually come up with a plan, and it's based on some mathy theories come up that were developed a while before, but just now put into place, who said that we can extract information about players that is not being used, and that managers and people managing baseball teams like this, can extract information about players that's not being used by the market, and thereby get a leg up on the market. Now, this only works if you're the first adopter. Basically, you'll only get this kind of effect if you're the first person to adopt this new signal. This is the point of the whole analogy here, is that they're trying to extract these signals from new information, or a new way of slicing up the information that other baseball teams are not using. So let me point out one particular scene. So here's just this little image is pulled from the scouts room, where we have the general manager, I believe, played by Brad Pitt, whose name I believe is Billy Beane, and all these people are the scouts. I think he's the coach to some degree, some not on the scout side. But the idea is a lot of the people in this room are trying to scout out new players, which would be a very difficult job if you're trying to find somebody who has good talent and is in your relatively small budget. We come up with this one scene, probably about the end of the first act, if I remember the movie, how it plays out. All right, that's about 25% through the film, where this one outspoken scout, they've had a few scenes to establish his character here in the scout room as giving some strong pushback to Billy Beane and his ideas, even before he comes away, meets the Jonah Hill character and decides, oh yeah, we should jump on this very mathy way of setting up our team. He's already established to give a lot of pushback, and they meet in the hallway, and he says, he really pushes hard and says, this is ridiculous. You're going to destroy this team, and you're going to be out of a job, and you're not going to be able to be employed anywhere because of this, and so on and so forth. Just given the Billy Beane character a hard time, and then it's his turn to say his dialogue, and he comes up with these snappy Aaron Sorkin type lines, like he likes to write. But the point of the lines is, he says, I've seen you already talk to these recruits, and you sit down in their living room and you tell the parent, when you have talent, you have talent. I tell you, your son has talent. He will I know he'll do well in baseball. And the Brad Pitt character, Billy Bean, he's playing. Billy Bean, the character Brad Pitt is playing, says, "But you don't know. You don't know that's true." And he hits the nail on the head. No, the scouts don't know that it's going to be true. To jump sports, there's the traditional example of Ryan Leaf, this NFL player who was touted NFL quarterback. Everyone thought he was going to be great. He went very high in the draft, if not first in the NFL draft, and he does not produce. He is not the great success that people thought he was going to be. And even the Billy Bean character in this show was drafted very highly in the baseball draft, or signed in the baseball very, very highly. I think that it was a draft, if I remember the movie correctly, and didn't pan out. It didn't work out. So we have a construct here that we can apply signaling theory to. So the idea is we have two types of baseball players, two types of players: those with the talent to excel in the professional league, and those without. Talent is a word I'm using to encompass a lot of different ideas. A lot of different ideas. It includes the question of physical ability, includes the question of skill sets that have been built up over the years, includes the question of confidence, includes the question of on and off field conduct, includes the question of injury proneness. I'm wrapping that all up into the idea of talent, and that maybe that's not a fair way of using the word talent, but it's how I'm going to use it for this very simple example. So, are you going to make it in the big leagues, or are you not? Those are the two types. So make it in big leagues, not make it in big leagues. So we're gonna try and do a little bit of mathiness here and come up with an example on the fly here. All right, so there's a certain percentage that's going to make it in the big leagues and a certain percentage that's not going to make it in the big leagues. Let's say that the true percentages are something like this. Of all the players at the lower level, let's just say 5% have what it takes underlying to make it in the big leagues. Let's just go ahead and say that's true distribution. Okay, so without knowing who if you just pulled randomly a player, minor league, high school, college, whatever pools are going into the big leagues, just pulled a player from there, and this is the true distribution. Then you have a 1 in 20 chance, a 5% chance of pulling somebody who's going to make it in the big leagues. Okay, well, it's expensive to recruit players. You don't want 1 in 20 of those recruiting efforts to succeed. And so what you want is we're going to call these the old signals. So when they're sitting around this room, they have some, like I said, the dialogue is built to pull you in and bring you along. So this is just the way that they've chosen to write the movie. But I think there's something that's being expressed that is underlying useful and important for signaling theory, as well as probably similar to what was actually being talked about. In this room, these scouts, these experienced scouts with decades of experience among them, they are all chewing the fat, as they say. They're discussing which player is going to be good, which player is not. And so they're trying to pull a bunch of old signals. They're saying things like, "Oh, he had a real good swing. You just heard the way the ball, the sound the ball made I watched him in practice hit the ball at base, or when he was at bat. It just had the right crisp sound. Oh, he has good form." They even brought in. It's a movie, and it's meant to be a little ridiculous. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if some scouts looked at this and said, "Aha, this is a signal." They even said, "Oh, such and such player is not going to make it in the big leagues. He has an ugly girlfriend." Oh, that means he doesn't have confidence. That was the argument that they made. So they're picking up these signals, and I'm not going to say they're useless signals. Perhaps there is a lot that goes into these signals, and that actually does improve your ability to understand if somebody's going to make it in the big leagues. And so the idea is the number of let's see how we're going to make this Excel file. I went ahead and I built it, and then I'm going to explain it now so you don't have to see me building it. Waste your time that way. So they have the old signals. This is the way the old signals were. We have true signal, and false positive or negative. So the idea is that we have these old signals. The old guard has a certain way of determining whether a player is going to be good, and is that accurate? Is that signal true to the actual reality? 75% of the time. So 0.75. Does it give a false positive or a false negative? 25% of the time. And at this point, I'm only worried about the diagonal here. So we have the true distribution of 5% of the players are going to make it, and 3.75% of the time, we get a signal that the player is going to make it, and that is an accurate signal. That's 75% of the time right here. Like I said, of the 5% of players who are going to make it in the big leagues, we have 75% of them, or a total of 3.75% of the total population of players, that we get a true signal that they're going to make it, and they're going to make it at the same time. We get a true signal that players are going to make it. We get a signal that they're going to make it, but it's a false negative among the 95% that's not going to actually make it, 23.75% of the time. And so of those we get, so the sum of these is right here. The sum of these is also down here on Excel. It tells us how many total times, what the total percentage of our population is that the old way is going to give us a signal that says they're a good bet. So a little over a quarter of the players, the old way is going to say, oh yeah, they're good. We know the true distribution is only 5%. But here we've got our old way saying a little over a quarter of players are good. So this is not a bad signal. You think about it, it's accurate 75% of the time. As far as compared to randomly drawing, we're going to likely improve based on this signal. And so we're going to apply Bayes' theorem. I'll write it out here for simplicity here. The probability of A given B equals, and we have a numerator of it's all multiplication division. I don't need to worry about numerator and denominator. We have probability of B given A times the probability of A divided by the probability of B. So that's Bayes' theorem right there. We have all the factors up here, and I've calculated out the left-hand side of the equation. So we have the probability of A, probability that somebody's actually going to make it in the big leagues, 5%. The probability of B, which is that we get a signal that they're going to make it in the big leagues. Well, that is a sum of the true signals that truly are picking up something from these players, and the sum of the false positives that we're talking about there. They get the old signal that says they will, but they're not actually going to make it in the big leagues. So we get the B event, which is a go signal from our old ways of scouting, 27.5% of the time, or 0.275 here. Event A is let me explain that. It's that somebody's actually going to make it. Event B is we get a signal that they're going to make it. So given that somebody's actually going to make it, what's the probability that we get a true signal that they're going to make it? Well, it's right here. I also can derive it out of this relationship right here. It's 75% of the time we get a true signal that we get this. It's true that we get the signal they're going to make it. Excuse me, let me phrase this right. The signal that they're going to make it in the big leagues is a true signal. So that's given that they're actually going to make it. How many times do we get the true signal? 75% of the time. Okay, so then we calculate it out. We have probability B given A. So the vertical line there. We know A for sure. What's the probability of B given that we know A? This is the guess who idea. Oh well, I have originally 24 players, 24 possibilities of people that I could be guessing. I've narrowed it down because I've gotten rid of everybody with a mustache. Okay, so I know, given that I know that we no longer, it's not a person with a mustache, for example, what is the probability now that the person has blonde hair, I don't know, or brown hair, or blue eyes, brown eyes, whatever. Because I've partitioned reality, I have a new probability of this B event happening. So that's why this vertical line is important. Probability of something given something else, given the information and signals that you have, you change the probability, the distribution that other things will happen. So what's the likelihood of somebody wearing a blue shirt in general in the population? I don't know. Let's say it's 5%. But let's say I give you information. Oh, I'm actually talking about in Boise. oh, you know what? Blue shirts, Boise State University. I bet there's a higher percentage over there. So let's say 10%. Okay, what's the probability of seeing a blue shirt in Boise on game day? So now I have two events, B given A and C in this case. Given, I've said not only is it in Boise, it's on a game day. Let's say it's 25 to 30% or something like that. So we've changed our probability of observing a blue shirt. We refined our prediction of there being a blue shirt based on other information besides actually observing whether it's a blue shirt or not. We've just observed other things, and that helps us refine the probability that the target concept of interest is observed. All right, so yeah, I'm going to do the calculation here. Yeah, we have probability of A, so probability of B given A here, 0.75 times probability of A, 0.05, all divided by the probability of B, 0.275. And so that means that given a signal that they're going to make it in the big leagues, 13.6% of the time, they're going to make it in the big leagues. That doesn't sound great, but compare it to that. If we just randomly drew somebody, 1/20th of the time, they will make it in the big leagues. We spend money, we hire scouts, and they use their traditional methods to find these signals, and they have increased our probability almost 3 times. It's almost 3 times as likely that the person they pick will actually make it in the big leagues than if we just randomly drew people. That's not bad. That's not too bad. And so let's go ahead and grab all this and copy it down, and let's start talking about new signals. So this is what the movie is all about. They're trying to say, well, let's forget most of what we thought we knew about indicators that somebody is going to be make it in the big leagues. Let's ignore a lot of these old signals that we used to gather, and focus on some signals that we can gather that are numerical in value, and we can calculate them, and that helps us understand with more precision the accuracy of the signal. It's not just a matter of, well, who has the loudest voice in the scout room, and whose mom prepared him really well for the day the scout came to watch him play. Let's try and remove some of the messiness that can happen there, the noise in the signal there, and also get at perhaps the more important signal of making it in the big leagues, means specifically getting more home runs. Is one of the points of the analysis that the Jonah Hill character does. Is he says, look, you need you want to win. In order to win, you need to score runs, and more specifically, more runs than the other team. But that's just kind of goes assumed in his model. But you need to buy runs. So if you buy runs, it means you have to get people onto the base. They have to hit the bat and get the ball far enough that they get onto base. So anyway, he drills it down to what does this mean to make it in the big leagues, and by then knowing better what this means, we can devise better and more accurate signals of who is going to do the thing we want them to do, because we know better what we want them to do. What does it really mean for them to make it and to get us wins? And so let's say he improves the signal to 90% of the time, he's getting a true signal that somebody based on his spreadsheets is a good match or isn't a good match, and that is accurate, that reflects the underlying reality, which we can't necessarily know. This private information or future information in this case, because we don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the future. We're using past events to predict what's going to happen in the future. So it's effectively private information held by the future or our future selves. All right. So since I copied over all the equations, it should work just as well. Let's just double check. Looks like those are all calling to the right cells. I didn't make anything an absolute reference, so yeah, it should relative references should work well. And so now let's compare these numbers right here. Oh, right here. Okay, so what we have is maybe a 2.5 times increase in the probability. Let's look at that. Yeah, so this is 236% higher probability that when that spreadsheet spits out a good signal, that person actually is a good player compared to before. Now, that means one more thing. there's one follow-on to that, which means that, let's take it like this. In 18% of the times, almost 19% of the times, we round up 19% of the times, we're getting an accurate signal on this player. 19% of the times, we get a signal that says good player, and it's going to be a good player, when the old ways would have not given us a signal good player, and it's going to be a good player. So the point is this mismatch. This times in which we're going to get a signal that says actually a good player, when the old ways would not give us a signal that's a good player and actually be a good player. So this idea is we have 19% of the time where we're going to be able to scout somebody and they'll be a good player, when the old two ways, which is followed by every other team in the league, these high cost teams, they are not going to detect it basically and get a signal as actually going to be a good player. So among those, we can find some deals. We can find some players that we're finding a truer signal on. Perhaps a good comparison is actually here, but regardless, the point of it all is that we have this mismatch. We have more accurate information. So maybe not every player we scout using this method is going to be better than the others, but if we do it over time, we apply it across the board, then the aggregate result is supposed to be we're going to get more value out of our players. We're going to be recruiting people who are ignored by the old methods. They're giving off some old signal that is producing some false negative is the idea. This number right here. So we have a number of players that are actually good that the old way is overlooking, whereas now we're overlooking far fewer of them. All right, so there's my money ball example, and we talked about Bayes' theorem. So let's jump over to some terminology here. Now, the key terminology here is prior, and if you talk to people, they talk about updating their priors, and so it's really a transformation of probability of A to probability of A given B. That's the key that's happening here. Is the question? We had just a raw A number. I gave you the example earlier of just the blue shirt. What is the likelihood of a blue shirt? I don't know. 5% of the time people wear blue shirts. Okay, let me give you additional information. Let me give you given B. Okay, I've given you said, it's not just a blue shirt generally, it's a blue shirt in Boise. Oh, well, let me update my priors. So no longer am I using this old percentage. I'm going to, mentally you do this automatically. I'm going to say, given the information that I have, now I have this new, it's in Boise. Given it's in Boise, probability that somebody's wearing a blue shirt, random person in the crowd that I just happen to see, is wearing a blue shirt is let's say 10%. Okay, now this probability of A given B becomes your probability of A. It becomes your new prediction. And then you get a new round. There's a new round of this happening, and I say, I'm going to give you more information. So you start with, okay, it's the probability of blue shirt in Boise. Now I'm giving you a new information, new B, beta 2, we'll say B2, a sub 2 there, is a subscript right there. Say it's in Boise, and it's on a game day. Okay, well, my old prior said 10%. Because it was probability of A, and I knew it was built on the idea that it's in Boise, it's given B1. Now probability of is going to be the probability of blue shirt given B, probability of blue shirt given that it's in Boise and that it's on game day. So I'm just going to give it a new round instead of being like A line B1 line B2 and just stack on. But this is the cycle that happens, and now I know it's in Boise on game day, so probably 25% of the people are wearing blue shirt to support Boise State in their sport. And so we're constantly doing this. We're constantly updating information. We're constantly saying, well, I know we have a certain belief about the reality that we live in, and lots of different ways. We've parsed reality. I am a good student. I am so employable. My job is of a certain kind. My boss is of a certain way, either good or bad, or have the XYZ characteristic. My fantasy football team is set up very well. Whatever it is, we have some certain prior beliefs, and as time goes along, we gather information. We get signals from the environment that help us update the probability of those beliefs, and it can change the likelihood of those beliefs being true. It can make it more likely or less likely. Well, I thought my boss was really nice, and then we had this really bad meeting at work, and it was just one meeting, and so it's still not. That doesn't mean my boss is bad. Just spawn of Satan or something. No. Maybe the boss had a bad day. Maybe I'm misreading the situation. But I still end up updating my priors. Okay, probability that the boss is good, which is A in this case, given one bad meeting. Well, the probability's gone down, but it hasn't gone to 0. All right, well, next week there's another meeting, and it happens, and it's very similar. Okay, well, I need to look to see if there's some other now I need to update my priors again, and the likelihood of 2 meetings and my boss being a tyrant, it goes up. So now I've updated it again. My probability of boss being good given 2 subsequent meetings, we're starting to see a pattern develop here. I can start to say the probability is going significantly downward, and we gather information like that. Now we also can not just gather information. Also, it's a question of how well we're rationalizing information. Perhaps the meetings went bad because me or my team, we just did a bad job. Maybe we are at fault, and the manager is just giving us some righteous fire here, a little kick in the butt to get us to do better, trying to motivate us to do better, and just pushing us to be what he or she knows that we can be. Maybe I can then say, well, let me update this idea. So, in fact, that is extracting a signal from my own work, and I can start to say, okay, what's the probability that my manager is good and had 2 subsequent mean meetings to me, and I now realize I'm doing a bad job? You know what? The probability that the manager is good actually has gone up from what it was before I realized I had a bad job. So extracting signals doesn't have to be a new event. It can be extracting new ideas from old signals. In fact, let's see if I can find a good picture. So there's this movie about the McDonald's founder, and I just want to pull one scene idea from here. And there's the guy who plays Ryan from The Office. I believe his last name is Novak. Okay, so this is actually, I think, the very scene. So he goes in, and he goes to this guy who's not the founder of McDonald's, but who has gotten into an agreement that isn't working well with the actual founders of McDonald's, this restaurant, a single restaurant, I believe, in California. And he said, I'll help you franchise. And they enter into an agreement that just is not working very well. It's very restrictive, and this guy is entirely external to the whole affair. And then he comes in, makes friends with the Michael Keaton, the person who Michael Keaton here is playing. The person who's not the founder, but will become the founder by the end of the movie. Spoiler alert. He plays Ray Kroc. That's the name. Yeah, plays Ray Kroc. Anyway, he comes into his office. Here's the lovely accounting hat tip that they give. He looks at the books. He looks at the ledger, which in that case was actually a book, a physical ledger, and he looks through them, and he summarizes the situation in a way that Ray Kroc, the person played by Michael Keaton, had not seen before. And what I like to point out when I bring this up is the information was already there. The signal is sitting in the ledgers or in the situation. All the information was there. Just nobody had put it together to say, these pieces, they fit together to say this. This is new signal you can grab out of existing information. So that's a great example of how you can get signals from all sorts of places, including from what's already there. That's signaling theory. The math idea behind it. You have priors, you're updating them, and based on the accuracy of your signal, your updates are better or worse, and you can extract value from the power of your signal. And so we then have to ask the question of how powerful is a signal? Well, again, if it's a costly signal, theoretically, it gives us a high probability, a high accuracy indication of whether or not the underlying characteristics exist. So it gives us a high accuracy of whether the underlying characteristics exist. In case you were listening, I just highlighted something on the screen that I was pointing out what I was saying, just emphasizing it. So that brings me back to the college example. So the traditional example of costly signaling is college. And there's a reason for it. First of all, because it's costly. The other reason it's a decent example is that it happens a lot. It's a screening mechanism that's used by a lot of people, a lot of businesses. Now, does that mean that if you get a college degree, you are definitely, what are the characteristics I said? You definitely will be conscientious, showing up on time, do hard work. You definitely will be intelligent, have a high IQ, definitely will play well with others. The variety of characteristics that it's supposed to represent? No. The signal's not 100%. There are a certain number of people who don't have those characteristics who will make it through a college degree and will be able to portray the signal of, oh, I have these characteristics. Likewise, there's also a false negative as well. They are people who are not displaying a college degree who have those very characteristics. So the screening mechanism is not 100%. It's a signal that helps narrow things down, but things can interfere with that signaling. If the signal comes to mean other things, so if the signal comes to mean that somebody instead of getting having a rigorous intellectual exercise that would weed out people who are less intelligent, is the idea. That's how colleges would advertise themselves, at least. If instead of that it means that somebody was able to say the right viewpoints to impress their professors and spend 4 years in the rec room or at parties or whatever, then the signal would lose some of its quality. It'd move from being a really accurate signal to being less accurate because you'd have more and more people who would be able to just, fluff their way through. It would not be as rigorous of an exercise. And honestly, maybe you had experience with this. This is a master's level class, so a number of you are on your second act, and your undergraduate degree was in something very different from accounting and very different from business. You have some majors that are softer than others. Accounting is in the soft sciences. It's more rigorous than some and less rigorous than other degrees. In accounting, presumably, it's a more rigorous degree in terms of how much technical knowledge you have to accumulate to pass the classes. And in most accounting degrees that I've seen, the critical issue is passing the intermediate financial accounting series. That's the part where most people give up if they aren't interested, or give up if they don't have the technical skills to succeed. That's great. That is more rigorous than a degree where all you have to do is restate 5 different ways the same accepted talking points of the degree, and you do an interpretive dance at the end. No disrespect to dancers. I can't dance very well, but that's not exactly a marker of technical rigor, of the kind of intelligence that a lot of employers are looking for, or the kind of intellectual skill set, at least. But compare that on the other side. That sounds very good for accounting, but compare that to, say, an engineering degree, where to get through that, you have not just like in accounting, we have the intermediate series and a few other classes that tend to challenge people. Some people can't wrap their mind around the legalistic language inside tax classes. Some people don't like the economic viewpoint in your managerial accounting classes. They want more rules. From my understanding is in an engineering degree, almost every class becomes a weed out class, because if you don't know your calculus really well and are able to apply it very quickly, so you can get the practical effects of that calculus down and written down as the answer, and can show your work and everything and document it, you will not do very well in most classes. So it is a much stronger signal. It should be anyway, depending on the school and depending on what they've done with their program. And so it should be a stronger signal of rigor. So my point is again, I'm trying to make sure I'm stating this probabilistically, because I know plenty of people who either did not go to college or did not try to go to the top colleges or whatever, who have plenty of natural intelligence and are very conscientious. I love talking to tradesmen who are plumbers and utility workers and people who have these skills that are essential, first of all, for the enjoyment of modern life, and are very good at their job. I've met some people who can diagnose a mechanical problem just amazingly. I recall one mechanic who was able to fix a problem that I had on an old car, in a way that was just pure talent. And so I can't look at that person's intelligence in his domain and say, well, it's not real intelligence because you didn't get a college degree. That's very silly. And likewise, it's not to say that everybody who gets a college degree is super intelligent or super conscientious. The theory goes that when employers require a college degree, the theory is that having that college degree is supposed to be a signal of some underlying characteristic. And sometimes it'll be a true signal, sometimes it'll be a false signal. And they're making a bet based on what they think these percentages lie up to, how well that information, that having a college degree, is going to update my priors. Okay, so I have a random number of possible people I can employ. What's the likelihood they'll be a match for the job? This is the true distribution right here. Probably pretty low, honestly, given the job. Okay, well, I'm gonna set certain characteristics. They have to have a college degree. let's say a bachelor's degree, for example. Okay, well, that's a B. That's a B signal. Okay, that's something I'm updating now. Okay, among those who have a college degree, what are the number of people who would be a match for the job? Okay, well, I'm going to add an additional characteristic because that's not enough. Years of experience. Okay, years of experience prove that you don't just have the college degree, but you can cut it in the real world, and you're going to have references from that job. So you didn't leave because you couldn't do the job. So that increases among those who have a college degree and have the necessary experience with references, how many of those are a match for the job. And the idea is that this should be updating my probability upwards. There's going to be a higher and higher match because each of these signals hopefully is improving the accuracy, partitioning reality in a way that I'm getting to a more and more match, and closer to 100%. It's not going to make 100% because there are always going to be ways that this system fails, but that's the idea. Okay, so I want to talk really quickly about costless signaling. The idea, what happens when there is no mechanism for you to kind of say, well, I have these characteristics. I'm going to put a signal out there that says I have those characteristics. What happens when that's not possible? And all we're left with is cheap talk. Let's say this often we're talking about in the moment. So in the moment, you're trying to convince somebody that you're a good match for the job, a good person. You're not going to rob them on the street. You're passing somebody by, and you want to send off a signal that says, don't have a heart attack, person I'm passing by. I'm not going to rob you. I'm not a bad person. What signals can you give off? Because honestly, there's nothing you can do that is costly enough that really would definitively update their priors to say you're for sure, or very high likelihood, good person or good for the job, or whatever the case we're talking about. The setup is this. So we have low and high. We're talking about actions taken, and we have low and high characteristics. So I'll go ahead with that. Characteristics. That's fine. And we're going to build some payoffs here. So we're going to have a parentheses, and I'm going to have payoff to first we're going to talk about payoff to the individual sending the signal, and then the payoff to the person receiving the signal. So each of these is going to have parentheses and two numbers or two numbers or letters and a comma between them. So I'll even write that down. I'm going to do sender payoff and receiver payoff. And so the idea is that costless signaling, so now there's no mechanism, there's no mechanism for you to invest in a way that would be specifically less costly to you as somebody who has the appropriate underlying characteristics, that you are meaningfully updating the priors of the receiver to say, oh, it's very likely that person has these characteristics. There's nothing you can do. You just got to send the signal. What situations will that signal be? Should that signal be believed, or is that signal likely to be more than just cheap talk? Most salesmen, honestly, that's the stereotype to think of when I'm talking about cheap talk. This person has an incentive for me to buy, so honestly, maybe they're likely to say things that aren't true, or not tell me some things that are true, or omit certain things so that I will buy. And so their talk is relatively cheap. They aren't going to disclose their private information. Well, under what circumstances would the sender disclose true and private information, and the receiver should believe that true and private information? We have to have a match. And so the basic idea is what are the payoffs to the sender versus the receiver? And there has to be a match. Is the long and the short of costless signaling. I'll talk about some examples about that in the future, or in just a minute. What you need the people who are of high characteristic to want to be hired. They have to match, and they have to have a higher D than C. And that has to do with the opportunity cost. So the question is it better, since I have the characteristics, to be hired, right here, D, than not be hired? That's the high action. That's the action that the receiver, the employer would want to take with somebody who has high characteristics. I want that as well, which means I have to have a low opportunity cost for this job, or low enough to justify what's going on. So the job has to pay enough, and I have to have poor enough alternative options to want the job. So that keeps people of high characteristic honest. So they're gonna pursue this and disclose their private information, and they're not going to either not apply for the job or somehow rule themselves out during the process. the interview process. And we have to have, similarly, the low people have to be honest as well. So their A has to be greater than their B. I'll put that down here, actually. So the low types have to want not to be hired more than to be hired. And so that's a question of the longer term opportunity cost. Usually we're talking about not, oh, I can collect a few paychecks before they figure out that I'm bad for this job. It's about, I don't want to lose time in this job and just be fired because I can't do the job. Part of that is making it clear to people, it's clarity of what the job entails. So people, if they understand how they're going to do the job, what's going to be required, then they can make a better assessment of whether they'll be good at it or not. And presumably that helps them understand the opportunity costs of entering this job, which is going to go nowhere for them. A lot of it has to do with the opportunity cost. So you in order for costless signaling, because there's no way for the receiver to get some sort of update besides, well, they tell me they're good for the job. I have to either believe them or not. Well, in this kind of a setup where D is greater than C and A is greater than B, I should believe them. They have no reason to be dishonest. These are the two dishonesty squares. Somebody who's high, who's not seeking to be hired, they're seeking the low action. This is a C payoff, that has to be low. And this is the B payoff, which somebody who is low wants to be hired. That's a B. That has to be relatively low as well. First of all, there's a question of opportunity cost, like I talked about, and what is the lay of the land? What are the alternatives people have? What are, if you're lower level, higher, if you're talking about certain levels of employment, we could talk about unemployment. Are there unemployment options? In which case, even people who have qualifications might see not being hired as better because they get to play video games all day and collect unemployment. It's fine. So they might apply, but then not really want it and botch the interview and not care. Likewise, there's a question of skin in the game. There's a question of long-term reputation. So, especially when we're talking about the low, this is really the biggest risk that I think employers are worried about. That they're going to invest a lot of money and time in a person, and they not have the underlying characteristics that are necessary to succeed in the job. And that either means that the employer has to fire that person and invest money in, or somehow get that move that person out of the firm. Might be slower than firing them immediately, but move the person out of the firm or not advance that person the way that they could have, and find somebody else who can do the job. Or it could mean investing extra time and resources in helping that person get those characteristics. So if it's a skill set that the person could learn, but they haven't learned yet, then the employer has to spend extra money because they were a low type and didn't have those skills already, but they got hired. So this is suboptimal here, this square right here. So this is the question of skin in the game. So how much skin does the employee have in the game? And a lot of that's about long-term opportunity costs. I kind of want to jump to the idea of small towns. So in a small town, everybody knows everybody and knows everything about everybody. That's what they say, right? In smaller towns, you know more of your neighbors, a higher percentage of your neighbors, I should say, at the very least, and you're likely to run into them more. And so when we start talking about a repeated game, when it's a small world, the disadvantage to the person, the sender of the receiver, of getting benefits that don't match what they're actually putting out, the disadvantage of that accumulates. When you're talking about a repeated game where you're likely to encounter these people again, like in a small town, for example, there's some built-in incentive. There's some long-term. Let me say it this way: there's some long-term skin in the game in terms of how you would treat the people around you. Whereas if you take the most anonymized version, not even talking about big cities, talking about the internet, the most anonymized version of things, it can become a real cesspool of anonymous people saying anonymous things to other anonymous people, and there's no repeating of the game. There's no it's pure and total. The comment sections are pure and total cheap talk in a lot of ways. The concept I want to get at is that at least one of these conditions, this one right here specifically, to keep the low types, those who don't have characteristics, from claiming they have characteristics, that it's necessary for people to have, it's useful for people to have repeated interactions, for this to be a multi-step game, a multi-turn game where they're going to be meeting these people in the future. They have some skin in the game as a result of that. So even though I might not be a match for this job, I don't want to ruin my reputation for other jobs that these people might talk to. That to me is one of the things you can look at is ways in which a non-costly game, a costless game where people are just talking and they could be lying, they could be not. You have very little way of knowing. You can't update very easily your priors with some sort of signal that partitions reality in a way that gives you relative certainty about the outcome. There still are ways in which you can have relative certainty that what's being said is true, and a lot of that is about relative certainty, not certain for certain, but relative certainty, and that generally has to do with, well, what are the opportunity costs for each individual, and specifically the person who's sending the signal. What kind of long-term costs are they running if they send a false signal? What kind of skin do they have in the game here? What kind of repeated game are we playing? Is this the only interaction we're going to have? Whereas my friend, who, let's say I play video games with his friend every Saturday, I don't know, let's just say he says, hey, I got to borrow your phone, I don't have my phone with me. Yeah. We've had a lot of interactions in the past, so first of all, I have a lot of prior knowledge, and furthermore, we're likely to continue this friendship in the future. If he ran off with my phone, that there's a significant skin in the game for him if he did that. So I'm likely to give him more trust because we have this longer term thing going. So I want to stop there. I don't want to take any longer. Gone over signaling theory here. Let's review real quick. Anything I wanted to discuss? I've laid down a lot of the terminology we use in information economics when we're thinking about this. I think it's really useful to understand what's going on inside the company and outside the company as the company talks to people outside in terms of signaling theory. What kind of signals are being sent? What kind of signals are in managerial accounting? What kind of signals are the performance measures sending? Is it an accurate signal? Are there ways to game it? Is it costly or costless? What kind of, how much has it really updated our priors? Say so and so manager met such and such hurdle in his or her contract. Well, does that really indicate the manager's actions were consistent with maximizing long-term profit? Well, maybe not. And how much does that signal increase the probability that that's the case? Likewise, even if you're not inside the company, when we're talking about managerial accounting, that's often what we're talking about. If you're talking about financial accounting, this is why audits are phrased the way they are. The audit letters are phrased the way they are. They're not guaranteeing an outcome. They're saying, we've done a test. We've extracted a signal. Hopefully it helps update your priors, but honestly, we're not guaranteeing anything because it's not a guarantee. We didn't look at everything. We're not the firm. We don't know the underlying condition. We've extracted a signal about the underlying condition, and tried to reduce some of that information asymmetry so that you can either manage the debt covenant if you're the bank talking about looking at this audited financial statement, or you can make a decision about ownership of the firm if you're a stockholder or thinking about becoming a stockholder. That's where I'll stop. Thank you very much.